The Terran Defense Station, Omega-7, floated in the void like a metal cathedral, its corridors echoing with the footsteps of beings from a dozen worlds. Admiral of the Galactic Coalition watched through the observation deck as human ships moved with their characteristic unpredictability, weaving between the more orderly formations of Allied vessels. The sight still unsettled him, even after 3 years of this unlikely alliance. Admiral, his aide, a young with trembling antenna, approached carefully. "The human commander has arrived." Turned, his 4 arms folding behind his back in a gesture of formal patience. Through the airlock came a figure that every expectation the galaxy had built about humans. She stood barely average height by human standards, her dark hair pulled back in a simple knot, wearing a flight suit that had seen too many battles. No medals adorned her chest, no ceremonial weapons hung at her side. She looked like any other pilot except for her eyes. Those gray eyes held depths that made even veteran warriors step aside. "Admiral," she said, her voice carrying the calm authority that had become legend across 17 star systems. "Reporting as requested." The Galactic Coalition had many names for her in their files. The humans simply called her Phantom. She carried no rank insignia, no family name that appeared in any registry. When pressed, she would only offer her call sign, the one that had spread through both enemy and Allied communications like wildfire. Phantom acknowledged, though using her call sign still felt strange. In galactic culture, names carried weight, history meaning. "We need to discuss the situation." The briefing room filled quickly with the Coalition's finest military minds. General Orr, whose people had fought for 50 years before the humans arrived. Commander Ha, whose tactical brilliance had saved 3 colonies from extinction. Admiral, one of the few humans who held traditional rank in their chaotic military structure. But when Phantom entered, conversations died. She took a seat at the far end of the table, away from the projection displays and data streams. While others studied star charts and casualty reports, she simply listened, her fingers drumming a silent rhythm against the metal surface. "The Empire has massed their 7th and 9th battle fleets at the checkpoint." General Orr's gravelly voice filled the room. "Intelligence suggests they're preparing for a major offensive against the colonies." 17 million civilians, Commander Ha added, her melodic voice tight with concern. 3 habitable worlds. If they fall, they gain control of the entire outer rim. Admiral leaned forward, his weathered face grim. "Our combined fleet strength is insufficient for a direct confrontation. They have technological advantages we still can't match." Observed the human commanders carefully. While spoke with military precision, Phantom remained silent, but her presence seemed to charge the air around her. The other species in the room had learned to read human body language, and something in her stillness suggested coiled energy. "The ships are faster, their weapons more powerful," Orr continued. "Their shield technology renders most of our missiles useless at range. A conventional assault would result in 70% casualties minimum." "Unacceptable," Ha stated flatly. "Indeed," agreed, "which is why we need alternatives." For the first time, Phantom spoke. "How many ships do they have?" The question seemed too simple, but Orr answered immediately. 437 confirmed, possibly more in reserve. "Crew complements. Standard is 800 per battleship, 300 per cruiser, 50 per fighter." Phantom's fingers stopped drumming. "Command structure." "Hierarchical. Admiral commands from the dreadnought Inevitable, positioned at the center of their formation." Around the table, alien minds worked through conventional tactical solutions. Flanking maneuvers, diversionary attacks, technological counters to advantages. But humans thought differently, and Phantom was human in the most dangerous way possible. "I need a ship," she said quietly. Admiral frowned. "Phantom, you can't seriously be considering." "Not a battle cruiser, something small, fast, unremarkable." Felt his chest plates tighten with recognition. He had seen this before, the moment when a human's mind shifted into territory that made the rest of the galaxy nervous. "What are you planning?" he asked. Phantom stood, moving to the tactical display. Her hands traced paths through the 3-dimensional representation of space, finding routes that conventional wisdom ignored. "Think in terms of honor and direct confrontation. Their formation reflects this. Outer perimeter, middle guard, command core, textbook military thinking. Which is why breaking through is nearly impossible," Ha pointed out. Breaking through, yes. Phantom's gray eyes reflected the holographic, but humans don't always break through. She manipulated the display, highlighting a trajectory that curved through empty space, using gravity wells and debris fields for cover. It was the kind of path that required precise timing, extraordinary piloting skill, and complete disregard for personal safety. "You're talking about a suicide run," said bluntly. "I'm talking about confusion, chaos, making them think in human terms instead of terms." General Orr's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. One ship cannot significantly damage a fleet of that size. "Damage isn't the objective," Phantom replied. "Disruption is." She began explaining her plan, and with each word, the assembled military leaders understood why humans had become such valuable and terrifying allies. Where other species saw impossible odds, humans saw opportunity. Where others calculated probabilities of success, humans calculated acceptable losses. The plan was audacious beyond measure. A single pilot would take a modified reconnaissance ship deep into enemy territory, not to engage the fleet directly, but to target their command and control systems. It required infiltrating a formation designed to prevent exactly that kind of assault, then escaping before hundreds of ships could coordinate a response. "The risk is enormous," Admiral protested. "Even if you reach the command ship, even if you disable their communications, the odds of survival are." "Irrelevant," Phantom cut him off. "The mission succeeds or it doesn't. Personal survival is a secondary consideration." Watch the exchange with growing unease. This was why the Galactic Coalition both needed and feared their human allies. Their willingness to sacrifice themselves for strategic advantage was tactically invaluable and philosophically disturbing. "We'll need 48 hours to prepare the ship," said finally, accepting the inevitable. 36, Phantom corrected. "They won't wait longer than that to begin their advance." As the briefing concluded and military leaders dispersed to their preparations, found himself alone with the human pilot. She stood at the observation window, watching the mixed fleet maintain its formations in the distance. "Why do you do this?" he asked. Phantom turned slightly, not quite facing him. "Do what?" "Risk everything. Your people's tendency towards self-sacrifice for tactical advantage. It's unsettling to those of us who value individual survival." For a long moment she was silent. When she spoke, her voice carried something hadn't heard before, not emotion exactly, but depth. "Every species in this coalition has worlds to protect, families to return to, names that will be remembered. Humans understand that sometimes the greatest victory requires someone to become forgotten. And you chose that role." "I chose to be useful." His forearms shifted uneasily. "Your call sign, Phantom. Is it because you appear and disappear in battle?" "No," she said simply. "It's because ghosts don't need to come home." As Phantom left to prepare for a mission that would likely kill her, remained at the observation window, watching human ships move through their chaotic patterns. He was beginning to understand that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their tactics. It was their willingness to become legends that no one would remember, to be heroes without names, to carry only call signs that would reverberate through the stars long after the voices that spoke them had gone silent. In 36 hours, one human pilot would either save 17 million civilians or die trying. For the Galactic Coalition, it was a calculated risk. For humanity, it was simply Tuesday. The modified reconnaissance ship Whisper hung in the launch bay like a predatory bird, its sleek hull reflecting the work lights that had burned for 36 straight hours. Chief Engineer Martinez stepped back from the final systems check, wiping grease from her hands with a rag that had seen too many impossible modifications. "She's ready," Martinez announced to Phantom, who stood examining the ship with the calm intensity of a surgeon reviewing her instruments. "We've stripped out everything non-essential. Life support is good for 18 hours, sensors are military grade, and the engine modifications should give you 30% more acceleration than anything they expect." Phantom ran her hand along the ship's hull, feeling the subtle vibrations of systems humming to life. "Weapons. 2 plasma cannons, forward-mounted. Limited ammunition, but they'll punch through most shields at close range. Also," Martinez hesitated, "Admiral insisted we install an emergency beacon." "Remove it." "Phantom." "Remove it. If this goes wrong, rescue attempts will only get more people killed. Martinez nodded reluctantly and made the final modification. Around them, the launch bay buzzed with activity as coalition forces prepared for their own role in the operation. While Phantom attempted to disrupt the fleet, Admiral would lead a diversionary attack from the opposite vector, drawing attention away from her infiltration route. Admiral approached through the maze of technicians and equipment. His four arms carried a data pad containing intelligence updates that had arrived throughout the night. Latest reconnaissance shows the fleet has moved into final assault formation, he reported. They'll begin their attack on the colonies in 14 hours. Then we launch in 10, Phantom replied, not looking away from her ship. The intelligence also revealed something else. Admiral is aboard the command dreadnought, but he's not alone. The High Command has sent Observer, their most respected strategist. This assault is more important to them than we realized. Phantom absorbed this information without visible reaction. How does that change the mission parameters? It doesn't, admitted, but it increases the political significance of success or failure. If you can disrupt this attack, it won't just save the colonies. It will demonstrate that even the Empire's most carefully planned operations can be compromised. And if I fail, then 17 million people die, and the Coalition loses our most effective pilot. For the first time, Phantom smiled, a brief, sharp expression that contained no warmth. Admiral, if I fail, you won't lose your most effective pilot. You'll lose someone who was only effective because she was willing to fail. The philosophical implications of this statement seemed to disturb. But before he could respond, Admiral's voice echoed through the bay's communication system. All personnel, this is Admiral. The diversionary fleet will launch in 8 hours. Phantom, you have final mission clearance. Good hunting. Phantom climbed into her ship's cockpit, a cramped space designed for efficiency rather than comfort. The instrument panels glowed with soft blue light, displaying the complex calculations that would guide her through enemy territory. She ran through the pre-flight checklist with mechanical precision, but her mind was already racing ahead to the moment of contact. The formation was a masterpiece of military engineering. Outer patrol ships created overlapping sensor nets that could detect approaching vessels at extreme range. Behind them, battle cruisers formed defensive walls capable of concentrating overwhelming firepower on any breakthrough attempt. At the center, the dreadnought Inevitable commanded the entire force with communications arrays that could coordinate hundreds of ships simultaneously. Breaking through conventionally was impossible, but Phantom wasn't planning a conventional approach. The Whisper launched from the Coalition fleet in absolute silence, its engines running dark to avoid detection. Phantom guided the ship along a trajectory that seemed to lead away from the fleet, using the gravity well of a nearby gas giant to mask her heat signature. To any observer, she appeared to be fleeing the coming battle. For 6 hours, she maintained this deception, allowing the ship to drift on minimal power while enemy sensors swept the space around the Coalition fleet. During this time, she reviewed every detail of military doctrine, looking for the psychological weaknesses that humans excelled at exploiting. Valued order above all else. Their battle formations reflected this preference, with each ship maintaining precise positions relative to its neighbors. Their communication protocols followed strict hierarchies, with information flowing up the command chain and orders flowing down. It was an efficient system, but it had a critical vulnerability. It assumed that threats would behave rationally. Humans, particularly human pilots facing impossible odds, rarely behaved rationally. When the time came to begin her approach, Phantom brought the Whisper's engines online gradually, using the gas giant's magnetic field to scatter her energy emissions. She plotted a course that took advantage of every piece of stellar debris, every gravity anomaly, every shadow cast by drifting asteroids. The route was insanely dangerous. At 3 points, she had to pass within a few hundred kilometers of patrol ships, relying on their predictable search patterns to find gaps in their coverage. Twice, she used debris fields where battles had been fought months earlier, threading between hulks of destroyed ships while hoping that her modified sensors could distinguish between active threats and dead metal. As she drew closer to the enemy fleet, Phantom began to appreciate the true scale of the force arrayed against the Coalition. The ships moved with mechanical precision, their formations shifting like clockwork to maintain optimal defensive coverage. Each vessel bristled with weapons that could destroy her ship with a single hit. The dreadnought at the center of the formation was particularly impressive, a kilometer-long monument to military engineering that had never been defeated in direct combat. But Phantom hadn't come here for direct combat. The final approach required the most dangerous maneuver of her career. Using a damaged freighter as cover, she accelerated directly toward the heart of the enemy formation, timing her approach to coincide with a routine communication pulse from the command ship. For exactly 7 seconds, every sensor would be focused on receiving data from their outer perimeter, creating a brief window where her small ship might go unnoticed. The gamble worked. She slipped through the inner defensive line just as Admiral's diversionary fleet engaged the eastern flank, drawing attention away from the command sector. Alarms began sounding throughout the enemy formation as they responded to the coalition attack, but by then, Phantom was already inside their defensive perimeter. The dreadnought Inevitable loomed ahead of her like a metal mountain, its hull from countless battles. Phantom could see weapon emplacements tracking her ship, but they were still trying to identify her as either friend or foe. In the confusion of battle, a single small ship might be a damaged ally seeking assistance rather than an enemy infiltrator. She had perhaps 90 seconds before they made that determination. Phantom brought her ship around to the dreadnought's primary communication array, a massive structure that coordinated the entire fleet's movements. Her plasma cannons charged with a whine that she felt through the ship's hull, targeting the array's central processing node with mathematical precision. The first shot disabled the primary transmitter. The second destroyed the backup systems. The third sent cascading failures through the entire network. For 30 seconds, the most powerful military formation in history was deaf and mute. But 30 seconds was enough. Without coordination from their command ship, individual captains began making independent decisions. Some moved to protect the dreadnought, others pursued diversionary fleet, still others maintained their original positions waiting for orders that would never come. The perfect formation began to fragment, and in that fragmentation, Phantom saw the opening that would either save 17 million lives or end her own. Enemy fighters were launching from every ship in the formation, converging on her position like angry insects. She had perhaps 5 minutes before they overwhelmed her defenses, but 5 minutes was enough to complete the second phase of her mission. Phantom brought the Whisper around toward the dreadnought's engine section, where emergency protocols would soon attempt to restore communications. If she could damage those systems as well, the confusion would last long enough for Admiral to exploit the chaos. As enemy fire began to fill the space around her ship, Phantom pushed her engines past their safety limits and dove toward her final target, carrying with her the hopes of 17 million people who would never know her name. The space around the dreadnought Inevitable erupted into chaos as dozens of fighters swarmed toward Phantom's position. Their plasma bursts traced deadly patterns through the void, each shot calculated to intersect her ship's trajectory. But the Whisper moved like something alive, twisting through impossible angles as Phantom pushed both herself and her ship beyond all reasonable limits. Her hands moved across the controls with inhuman precision, each micro-adjustment buying her precious seconds of survival. The ship's hull groaned under the stress of constant acceleration changes, and warning lights painted the cockpit in urgent reds and yellows. But Phantom's gray eyes remained fixed on her target, the dreadnought's secondary command center, where emergency protocols were already beginning to restore fleet communications. A plasma burst scorched past her starboard side, close enough to overload several sensor arrays. Another fighter dove from above, its pilot trying to ram her ship in a desperate kamikaze attack. Phantom rolled inverted and dove beneath the dreadnought's hull, using the massive ship's own structure as cover while she lined up her final shot. The emergency command center was heavily armored, designed to function even if the primary bridge was destroyed. Under normal circumstances, breaching those defenses would require sustained bombardment from multiple heavy cruisers. But Phantom had noticed something during her approach that the designers had missed: a thermal exhaust port that channeled waste heat from the backup power generators. It was barely 2 meters wide, protected by automated defenses, and positioned where only a suicidal pilot would attempt to target it. Which made it perfect for her purposes. Admiral to Phantom, her communication system crackled with static from the ongoing battle. Whatever you're doing in there, do it fast. My diversionary fleet can't hold their attention much longer. Phantom didn't respond. Speaking would require concentration she couldn't spare, and besides, there was nothing left to say. Either this worked or it didn't. Either 17 million people lived or they died. Either she became a footnote in military history or she became nothing at all. She brought the Whisper around in a spiraling dive that three laws of physics and common sense, threading between the dreadnought's defensive turrets while enemy fighters tried to match her trajectory. Her ship's computer screamed warnings about structural integrity and engine overload, but Phantom had disconnected most of the safety systems hours ago. The thermal port rushed toward her, a tiny target surrounded by enough firepower to vaporize a city. Automated defenses locked onto her ship, but they had been designed to intercept missiles and torpedoes, not a pilot crazy enough to use her ship as a guided projectile. Phantom fired her remaining plasma rounds directly into the exhaust port at the exact moment she pulled up from her dive, the shots traveling down the thermal channel like angry lightning. Behind her, secondary explosions began to bloom through the dreadnought's hull as cascade failures spread through the emergency command systems. The massive ship shuddered, its perfect formation beginning to drift as backup power systems failed throughout the command sector. For the second time in 10 minutes, the fleet found itself without central coordination, but this time the damage would take hours to repair. Throughout the enemy formation, confusion reigned. Ships that should have been protecting the flanks moved to defend the command vessel. Units that should have been pursuing's fleet found themselves receiving contradictory orders from junior officers who lacked authority to coordinate large-scale maneuvers. The mathematical precision that had made the military feared across the galaxy began to collapse into chaos. Admiral recognized the opportunity immediately. His diversionary force, originally intended only to draw attention away from Phantom's infiltration, suddenly found itself facing an enemy fleet that couldn't coordinate its response. He ordered his ships forward, exploiting gaps in the formation that appeared as individual captains made decisions without central guidance. But Phantom was no longer watching the larger battle unfold. Her ship, damaged by repeated near misses and pushed beyond its design limits, was finally beginning to fail. Engine power fluctuated wildly, life support systems struggled to maintain atmosphere, and her navigation computer displayed error messages in 3 languages. More critically, she was surrounded. The fighters that had been chasing her through the dreadnought's superstructure had finally cornered her in a pocket of space where her maneuverability couldn't save her. 20 ships formed a closing sphere around the Whisper, their weapons charging for a synchronized volley that would ensure her complete destruction. For most pilots, this would have been the moment of surrender or final desperate prayer. But Phantom was not most pilots. As the enemy ships closed in, she did something that no tactical manual in the galaxy recommended. She accelerated directly toward the largest concentration of enemy fighters. The pilots, trained in conventional combat doctrine, expected her to try to escape, or at least attempt evasive maneuvers. They did not expect her to transform her crippled ship into a kinetic weapon aimed at their formation. At the last moment, as collision became inevitable, Phantom activated her ship's emergency beacon, not the one that Martinez had removed, but the one she had installed herself during the long approach through enemy territory. But this beacon didn't broadcast a distress call. Instead, it transmitted a specific frequency that overloaded the fighters' communication systems, causing their targeting computers to lock onto each other instead of her ship. In the confusion that followed, 3 enemy fighters collided while trying to avoid the crippled human ship that seemed to be everywhere at once. The others scattered, their pilots' nerves broken by an enemy who refused to behave rationally even in the face of certain death. Phantom used those precious seconds to plot one final course, not toward escape, but toward the dreadnought's primary reactor. If she was going to die, she would ensure that the flagship would be too damaged to continue the assault on the colonies. But as she began her final approach, something unexpected happened. The space around her ship suddenly filled with coalition fighters, their familiar blue and silver hulls diving through the formation like angels of salvation. Admiral had broken through the enemy fleet's disrupted defenses and was fighting his way toward the dreadnought's position. "Phantom, this is," her communication system burst to life. "You've done enough. Get out of there while we finish this." For the first time since the mission began, Phantom hesitated. Escape was possible now. The chaos she had created in the enemy fleet had opened corridors that her ship might be able to navigate despite its damage. She could return to the Coalition fleet, receive a hero's welcome, and live to fight another day. Instead, she continued her approach toward the Dreadnought's reactor. "Negative, Admiral," she replied, her voice carrying the same calm authority that had become legend across 17 star systems. "Mission parameters remain unchanged." "Damn it, Phantom, the fleet is broken, you've already won." "The fleet is disrupted," she corrected. "Not destroyed, they'll regroup within hours and continue the assault. This ends now." Admiral understood then that he was listening to someone who had never intended to survive this mission. Phantom hadn't come here to disrupt the fleet temporarily. She had come to ensure that it would never threaten the colonies again. The Dreadnought's reactor section was the most heavily defended part of the ship, surrounded by overlapping shield generators and automated defense systems that could track and destroy incoming threats with mechanical precision. But those systems had been designed to stop conventional attacks, not a pilot who had already demonstrated complete disregard for her own survival. Phantom's ship, held together now more by determination than structural integrity, punched through the outer defenses in a burst of desperate acceleration. Her remaining weapons, charged with power drawn from life support systems, carved through the reactor's containment fields with surgical precision. The explosion, when it came, was visible from 3 star systems away. The Dreadnought Inevitable, flagship of the 7th Fleet and symbol of imperial power across the galaxy, died in a burst of nuclear fire that consumed everything within a 50-kilometer radius. With it died Admiral, Observer, and 3,000 of the Empire's finest soldiers. And with it died a human pilot whose real name would never be known, whose service record would remain classified, and whose only memorial would be the 17 million people in the colonies who lived because she chose to become a ghost. Admiral's fleet found no trace of the Whisper in the aftermath. Whether Phantom had escaped in those final seconds or died with her target remained a mystery that the Coalition's finest investigators could never solve. But across the galaxy, in cantinas and military briefings, in the stories that pilots told each other during long watches, a legend began to grow. They spoke of a human pilot who carried no name, only a call sign that reverberated through the stars. They told of impossible maneuvers and desperate courage, of someone who appeared when hope was lost and vanished when the battle was won. Some claimed to have served with her, others insisted they had seen her ship in distant systems, but none could provide proof that she had ever existed at all. Admiral, filing his after-action report weeks later, struggled to explain humanity's role in the victory at. The official records would note the successful defense of the colonies, the destruction of the 7th Fleet, and the promotion of Admiral for his tactical brilliance. But the reports would say nothing about the pilot whose sacrifice had made it all possible. Because ghosts, as Phantom had said, don't need to come home. Years later, when Coalition forces encountered fleets in other systems, they would sometimes hear enemy communications reference the human Phantom. A warning passed down through their military hierarchy about the unpredictable nature of human tactics. They had learned to fear an enemy who might appear anywhere, strike without warning, and disappear into legend. And in the Coalition fleet, when young pilots asked about the greatest heroes of the war, the veterans would tell them about Admiral's brilliant strategies, General Orr's tactical innovations, and Commander Ha's defensive mastery. But sometimes, in quiet moments between the stars, they would mention another name. Phantom, a call sign that carried no history, no family, no story beyond the moment when one human pilot chose to become the darkness between stars, so that others might live in the light. She had carried no name, only a purpose that reverberated through the galaxy long after her voice had gone silent, ensuring that heroes without names would never be truly forgotten.